This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks slipped today on news that the number of global coronavirus cases exceeded 1 million. Investors are also pretty doubtful about a U.S. brokered deal between Russia and Saudi Arabia regarding oil prices. As a result, MSCI's index of emerging market shares fell 0.5% on the day. In South Africa, the JSE tracked weaker global markets with concern that the COVID-19 pandemic might worsen in the coming weeks, of course, weighing on investor sentiment. Tencent, which of course influences the JSE via Naspers, has been falling, and that of course has weighed on the bourse as well. Now, also coming up on today's show, OPEC Plus calls for an oil producers' virtual meeting to stem the fall of crude prices. Ethiopia plans a $450 million boost to local banks. And the World Bank unveils a $160 billion kitty to cushion strained economies. Well, let's start off with that OPEC Plus coalition. It is rushing to pull together a meeting of its members and possibly other oil-producing nations. This after President Donald Trump called for a coordinated production cut to stem the historic rout in crude prices. Now, a virtual meeting will be held on Monday and will be open to all producers, not just those amongst OPEC and its allies. However, it still is not yet clear which ones will attend. The U.S. so far has given no indication that it's prepared to join. Saudi Arabia has made it clear that it will only cut production if others do, including the U.S., if others shoulder some of that burden. Meanwhile, Trump shocked markets on Thursday by tweeting that he expected Russia and Saudi Arabia to cut output by about 10 million barrels, or roughly a tenth of global petroleum output. Well, let's get the latest on this. CGTN's Giles Gibson joins us now in Washington. Good to have you on the show with us, Giles. Now, last we heard about that meeting, OPEC nations and, of course, its allies had scheduled a meeting on Monday. What do we expect to be the focus of that meeting, and do we know who exactly will be attending yet?
Well, we understand that Saudi Arabia have called this meeting, and we also are expecting the OPEC Plus members to be attending this video conference because, of course, in this time of the coronavirus pandemic, it's just simply not possible for officials and government ministers to be travelling to Vienna, where OPEC's headquarters are. We're also getting reports that this meeting could be expanded to include members or ministers from the US, Canada, the UK and Mexico, but at this stage we don't have a definitive guest list for who's going to be attending this virtual meeting.
Well, Russia, of course, continues to deny that any form of agreement is in the horizon. What are the obstacles to a deal? And if there is one finally reached, what exactly, or what do you think it will look like?
Well, of course, in that tweet that President Trump put out earlier in the week, he talked about Russia and Saudi Arabia cutting their production by 10 to 15 million barrels. He didn't in his tweet specify what the time frame for that would be, but generally in the oil industry we talk about million barrels per day. Now, according to one analyst, this tweet from President Trump was described as nonsense. That's because this sort of a cut of 10 to 15 million barrels per day by Saudi Arabia and Russia that the president was talking about in this tweet, that would amount to a 50% cut by both of those nations. So a lot of analysts in the oil sphere right now are saying that the president's tweet is just not realistic and that we won't be seeing that level of a cut to production.
Well, despite this, Giles, we did see oil futures surging today on that news. But what's the picture in the actual physical market? We hear in some places physical prices have actually gone negative now.
Yeah, if we just take a step back for a second and look at what's happening here, of course, demand for crude oil has absolutely plummeted over the last few weeks and months as the coronavirus pandemic has just got worse and worse. But actually, supply has been fairly stable. And we've seen, of course, this price war breaking out between Saudi Arabia and Russia. What that means is that all that extra supply is now piling up and storage capacity right around the world is just filling up. So you have all of this spare crude oil not going anywhere at the moment. And that's when you get this scenario where producers could actually start paying people to take crude oil off of their hands.
Well, let's shift focus slightly back to U.S. President Donald Trump. He actually was the first to tout this idea of a cut of 10 million barrels. So is it clear whether the U.S. will take part in that cut? Is there any clear plan from the country as to how they plan to protect U.S. producers?
Well, President Trump is actually hosting a roundtable at the White House with major CEOs from big oil producers here in the United States. That's set to kick off in the next hour or so. What the problem is for these big US oil producers is that their average break-even price is expected or is estimated to be between $48 and $54 per barrel. Clearly at the moment oil prices are just not hitting those sorts of levels, so US oil producers are really struggling at the moment to make ends meet.
Well, as always, many thanks for your insight there, Giles. That's Giles Gibson joining us in Washington. Well, let's head to Rwanda now. The government has secured a $109.4 million in emergency funding from the International Monetary Fund. Now, the disbursement will help the East African nation, which has registered 84 coronavirus cases so far, to address the pandemic. The emergency assistance is drawn under the Rapid Credit Facility. This makes Rwanda the first African nation to receive a loan facility from the fund. The IMF also projects that Rwanda's GDP growth this year will tumble to 5.1%. At the same time, the World Bank has approved $1.9 billion in global coronavirus funding. That includes $82.6 million to Ethiopia, $50 million to Kenya, and about $47 million to the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the meantime, Kenyan firms saw a much sharper decline in operating conditions in March. The downturn was widely due to the outbreak of COVID-19 in East Africa's most advanced economy, which as a result led to a large drop in consumer demand and client orders. Now, Kenya's Purchasing Managers Index dropped to 37.5 in March from 49.0 in February. Now, during the period, businesses consequently reduced activity as authorities urged companies in the public and private sectors to work from home. The Kenyan government also ordered dusk to dawn curfews to combat the spread of the novel disease, which has impacted business operations in the country. And in South Africa, the competition watchdog is investigating over 300 complaints against retailers and suppliers for charging excessive prices for essential products during the COVID-19 pandemic. The complaints are focused on hand sanitizers, face masks, toilet paper, flu medication, as well as other products. With more on this, here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola.
The competition authorities have been a force for good in South Africa for many years now. It deals with complex competition matters which involve large legal teams, detailed processes, and lots of legal argument and counter-argument.
I think that the regulations that they've published actually around excessive pricing short-circuit the investigation and also short-circuit the proceedings quite significantly.
The authorities have received over 500 complaints from consumers about alleged excessive pricing of essential suppliers. They have been whittled down now.
They have then issued letters to most of the other suppliers asking for a 48-hour response, which is fairly immediate, of course, saying, look, here's the allegation and what is your answer to all of this.
they've effectively introduced a much stricter test to excessive pricing. And if, for example, you can't explain why it's gone up by 20%, yet your costs have only increased by 10%, then you're going to find yourself in difficult terrain.
The competition authorities don't really have a lot to do, considering that most businesses have been closed for the duration of the lockdown.
If there are other emergency or urgent issues that come up during this period, they'll turn their attention there. But all of the Commission's resources are very much focused on complying, and they have on ensuring compliance, and they have sufficient numbers of lawyers, economists, investigators, analysts who can do the job.
The authorities are adapting to the crisis and using technology to the benefit of consumers. The flip side is that consumers may overreact.
We are going to see, I think, a lot of spurious cases, and I think the fact that they initially had 500 and now 250. I think we saw panic buying. I think you're going to see sort of panic complaints almost being made at every turn.
On a moral level, price gouging has been equated to treason.
This is, as I say, it's of a different order to taking advantage of imperfections in the market or a dominant position in the market and placing your prices above what the competitive level would be were it not for your monopoly or were it not for your dominance. That's the stuff of antitrust. This is the stuff of treason, if you like, in circumstances like this.
Retailers that took advantage of the national lockdown are likely to feel the full wrath of the law when those fines are imposed. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Parkhurst, South Africa.
And now a look at our corporate headlines today. Credit rating agency Moody's has warned that measures put in place in order to shield Kenya's banks from disruptions associated with the COVID-19 pandemic might not hold should the situation worsen. Now, the agency says prolonged disruptions in key sectors could slow down East Africa's biggest economy and cause severe problems to banks as customers default on their loans. Although the Central Bank of Kenya plans to relax rules dealing with provisioning for loan losses by lenders, it has yet to provide any specific details on this proposal. And Comair, which operates Kulula as well as British Airways in South Africa, has called off its acquisition of Star Air Maintenance and Star Air Cargo. Now, the deal would have seen the company pay roughly $4 million, as well as enter into a profit-sharing agreement capped at around $13 million. Comair has so far lost about 53% of its value this year. The carrier's share price was up 0.72% in early trading on Friday following its latest announcement. In the meantime, Zimbabwe's youth entrepreneurs lender Empower Bank Limited has reported a loss after tax of about $5.4 million for the year ending in December 2019. The lender marked its first year of operations during the period under review. It also implemented cost containment measures to help keep losses under control under the Southern African nation's hyperinflationary environment. And finally, British Airways has reached a deal to temporarily suspend more than 30,000 of its cabin crew and ground staff. The airline, which has grounded most of its fleet due to the coronavirus, has been locked in talks with unions for more than a week now. The decision will affect all staff at Gatwick and London City Airport after the British flagship carrier suspended its operations at both locations until the crisis is over. That is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let us head into a quick break now. Still to come. Ethiopia plans a $450 million boost to local banks. And the spread of coronavirus disrupts trade between South Sudan and the DR Congo.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Africa. Well, let's head to Ethiopia now. The country says that it has seen remarkable results from its domestic resource mobilization scheme, which was launched to mitigate the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the government also says it will soon implement the plan of injecting more than $450 million into private banks in order to comfort the economy. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Like most in the world, the Ethiopian economy is feeling the hit caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The government has diverted its attention to local resource mobilization to be used for any bad days ahead. And so far, $6 million in cash and millions of dollars of support in kind have been collected from the public.
This pandemic is not only a problem of health, it's a problem of the economy, it's a problem of the social affairs, and overall, it's an issue of national existence. Therefore, based on our poverty level and existing situation, we have to prepare quickly. We have to minimize the effects of the virus on our economy. Secondly, as per our call, what the public is doing is to support each other, which is remarkable. We have laid a working scheme to raise funds and support in kind.
The government has said it will soon deliver its promises of injecting $456 million to the economy through private banks. There's more. Its task force with a mandate of resource hunting has been successful.
At the level of the federal government, we have a task force with the mandate of locating and securing establishments for the use of corona-related needs. In the capital, Addis Ababa, for instance, close to 200 places are prepared for holding and even for providing medical services. In total, close to 200,000 people can be served there in the future.
But the government also is planning ahead.
We have an emergency food accumulation program to be used for times of drought and at times of any natural disaster. We have this scheme within the country and abroad. We now believe we have to increase our capacity in this area even further. And in case we have to use this plan to provide for our people during this corona pandemic, then first we have to make sure we reach the higher level. We are working on this seriously.
The coronavirus pandemic is expected to adversely affect many economies, especially those in Africa. The good news is most countries of the continent already are aware and are trying to do something about it, at least to minimize the effect. Economic experts say Africa needs an international support to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, the coronavirus has had a major impact on the global economy in Africa, and particularly for small businesses. The weekly market day that is held at Sakure along the border between South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo has now been closed as part of the South Sudanese government's efforts to mitigate the global threat posed by COVID-19. Now, the traders and authorities fear the disastrous impact of that COVID-19 will have on a country already reeling from a 5-year civil war.
A team from the United Nations mission in South Sudan visited the border area with DRC to assess the security and human rights situation and monitor the return and reintegration of displaced persons, as well as commercial activities at the border.
When it comes to this coronavirus, I don't know if it reaches, I'm sure most people will be affected, because right now there is no screening here for coronavirus. We have Ebola. Maybe it will come later on, we are not sure. And the border is closed. Yes, there are several pioneer roads where people even fluke and they go to Congo, and the Congolese also fluke, they come here.
The border market is normally busy on Friday, with traders from both countries meeting to exchange goods. However, the government of South Sudan recently announced the closure of its borders with neighboring countries, and as a result, the market has closed down.
I come here every Friday with salt and soap to sell to the Congolese. I use the money to buy flour. oil and rice, which I take home for my family. This has been my routine every week, but now it is going to be harder for me to feed my family. Right now, I don't have anything at home. I was hoping to find a few things here today.
Most communities around this border town are economically dependent on the weekly market.
It's really affecting us because we are very dependent on this market. I always come here to buy palm oil and sell it in our village. But now with this sickness, there's nothing we can do. I have to go home and take care of my children.
More than 800,000 people have been infected with the coronavirus across over 200 countries and territories, killing more than 42,000. South Sudan is one of the few countries in Africa without any recorded cases of COVID-19. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, the EU ambassador to Tunisia, Patrice Bergamini, has announced that the European Union will allow the immediate disbursement of almost $272 million in budgetary support for Tunisia. Now, this will be in the form of donations to help the North African nation contain the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, mitigate against its socio-economic impact. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi reporting.
EU ambassador in Tunis said the decision was announced by European Commissioner for European Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement negotiations at a telephone conversation with Tunisian Foreign Affairs Minister Nuruddin al-Rai.
The Tunisian diplomacy is stepping up efforts to get more financial and health support from its international partners to provide more equipment and medicines to face this crisis.
The EU also announced that funds earmarked for the health sector support program in Tunisia will be beefed up, as they will increase from 20 million euros for the 13 governorates to 60 million for the 24 regions in the country.
The EU is providing a package of loans, donations and support funds to tackle COVID-19. The economic repercussions will hit all sectors and activities. The EU stands with Tunisia. Now, it's necessary to set our national priorities.
The Finance Commission at the Tunisian Parliament stressed its readiness to interact with legislative requests from the government to overcome the current crisis.
The EU has made an important step, but in reality, all this money will not be enough to face the social and economic bomb that will hit Tunisia. We urge the government to accelerate the pace of support to the most vulnerable classes to avoid more social tension amid the coronavirus crisis.
The Tunisian African Business Council has called for the immediate formation of an economic and social council, including experts with experience in crisis management and privileged relations with international donors, in order to save the economic fabric in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. The Minister of Finance stressed that the situation is becoming increasingly difficult and complex. He added that the government is working to find ways to finance the state budget and mobilize new resources to manage the additional costs caused by the COVID-19 crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, let's head to Morocco now. The country is grappling with what is being described as its biggest ever property scam. Now, more than $65 million have allegedly disappeared, leaving over 1,000 home buyers out of pocket. The man accused of being at the forefront of the scheme has been charged and is in detention awaiting a trial now. With more on this, here's CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy.
Yuria Gwasi is just one of the victims of what has been described as Morocco's biggest ever property scam.
We want to know who scammed us. All our documents went through public administrations, the notary, the ministry. All our documents went through these places.
Adverts on state television promised these protesters their dream homes at 3 for the price of 2. But all that was just a fantasy. More than $65 million have allegedly disappeared, leaving the likes of Gwasi out of pocket.
The person responsible is certainly the promoter, because there is a swindle, and besides, the case is now at the court level, so we let the justice system do its work. Now, the scam is growing, and when we say that the scam is growing, the law must also grow.
In a country where corruption is endemic, the unprecedented scale of this alleged fraud is also generating political waves.
The state must be present to develop the rule of law in such a way that the rule of law is ahead of the swindle. It must call upon the professionals because they are closest to the real estate sector.
The man accused of being at the forefront of the scheme is Mohamed El Kadi. He is the head of a group of firms that believes to have cashed advances from at least 1,000 victims. The home buyers had invested in around 15 fictitious real estate projects in and around Casablanca over a decade. El Kadi is also accused of receiving advances for apartments that never made it beyond the paper they were drawn on.
The president of Bab Dana Group scammed us all in a professional way by using TV ads, real estate shows, as well as billboards that could be seen from Casablanca to Rabat.
Real estate is among the sectors most affected by corruption in Morocco. The sector is regulated by a 2002 law, which was amended in 2016. However, a decree needed to implement that overhaul is still pending. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, but still coming up on the show. The World Bank unveils a $160 billion kitty to cushion its strained economies. And African governments partner with tech giants to battle fake news.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, the World Bank has approved the rollout of $160 billion in emergency aid to help fight COVID-19 over the next 15 months. Now, the bank has approved the first set of fast-track crisis projects. An initial $1.9 billion will go to 25 nations, with operations moving forward in another 14 nations. India will be the largest beneficiary with a facility for $1 billion, followed by Pakistan with $200 million in assistance. The World Bank says it will help countries purchase medical supplies, establish isolation centers, and support the most vulnerable households. Meanwhile, the European Union is considering a major financial package for workers, which will pump about $110 billion into the bloc's economy to help those hit by the COVID-19 outbreak. CGTN's Tony Waterman has more from Brussels.
Coronavirus has paralyzed just about every corner of European society and economy. So hundreds of millions of people are locked inside their homes. Almost every single factory, restaurant, and shop is sitting idle right now, which means that many people's incomes have fallen dramatically. This new funding instrument that the European Commission is proposing would help support these workers. It's called SURE, and it's going to mobilize $110 billion in loans. These are going to be financed in the open markets. Now, those loans would go out to the countries worst affected by COVID-19, and the money would support those governments' efforts to replace a large part of their workers' lost income.
When such a crisis hit, the most important part is to keep people in the companies. So therefore, the SURE scheme is the guaranteeing pillar. Because when you keep them in the companies, the knowledge stays in the business and in the company. And then the moment the world economy picks up again, those companies can take the order and recover quickly.
Keeping money flowing into households also helps to stabilize consumption and funding for things like Social Security. So Germany has used this model quite successfully in the past, and it's seen as one of the big reasons why Germany recovered so quickly after the 2008-2009 crisis. Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, they also have similar programs. Now, these loans will be available to all EU countries. They will be guaranteed by those member states to the tune of $27 billion. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says she's spoken to a number of leaders and that there is strong support for the program and that she expects the proposal to be quickly adopted by the Council. Some even see this as an alternative to the controversial Corona bonds. Now, the SURE program would bring the total amount of approved funding in the EU to $3 trillion. That is by far the largest amount of money ever spent on a crisis. It should help blunt some of the economic damage being caused by coronavirus, but really the next challenge is going to be the long-term recovery. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Now, in India, the COVID-19 pandemic has magnified the country's economic troubles, from high unemployment rates to sluggish growth. The situation has been aggravated by a lockdown that has shocked millions of workers across the country. Here's Shweta Bajaj with the details.
Endless rows of closed shops and a complete halt in construction. Before the lockdown, India's economy was already in a slowdown. The lockdown has meant that India's infrastructure projects have come to a screeching halt. But the major impact would happen on job losses. India will lose millions of jobs. The lockdown has hit the informal sector the hardest. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's midnight announcement forced millions of daily wage workers to migrate from major Indian cities back to rural areas. Many of those who have returned to their villages struggle for daily meals. Over half of India's informal sector, that's 220 million people, are daily wagers, while the rest work in agriculture.
We were just not prepared. This 4 hours notice. We didn't have any field kitchens. We didn't have any emergency branches of banks open where people can go, you could give them checks and say, go and collect your money, or we'll put money in your DBT, go and collect it. We shut everything down. It totally unplanned for, uncalled for, midnight shutdown. It's just like demonetization revisiting again.
Economic growth concerns weigh heavy on the Indian stock markets. Before the COVID-19 lockdown, India's banking sector was ailing. The government has provided relief to borrowers with extensions on loan payments. But banks that are already under pressure are still deciding how to pass this benefit to customers. After the lockdown, analysts say they expect an increase in public spending to help improve people's livelihoods.
Now, with the growth rate falling even further, fewer jobs are going to be created. And that means joblessness is going to increase even further. So this is very grim, this is very serious, and the government will have to increase public expenditure significantly. And if it means, this is a warlike situation and it has to be tackled like a warlike situation.
India has reported a fall in tax collections amid the economic slowdown, which has in turn affected the government's finances. The country's healthcare budget only makes up 1% of its GDP, which means high out-of-pocket expenses for Indian nationals. And the gaps in Indian economy are only becoming more visible by the COVID-19 pandemic. Shweta Bajaj, CGTN, New Delhi, India.
Now, as the coronavirus continues to spread around the world, one multinational is using its China best practices to protect its global employees from COVID-19. It's doing so while also maintaining its sales. While CGTN's Zhang Yongfeng looks at how the multinational nutrition and wellness company is bringing its Chinese insights to tame the coronavirus.
It's never been so difficult for multinational companies in decades. A pandemic that's caught many global firms unprepared, with factories shut, shipping disrupted and market demand plummeting. but there's a lucky few that are in better positions. H&H Group is a leading nutrition and wellness company listed in Hong Kong with centers in Australia, Europe, China and the US. Its CEO says the company is strongly positioned and its China factory resumed work as early as February the 3rd.
We mostly manufacture in China, in Europe and in Australia, both our infant formulas as well as our supplements, our baby diapers and different categories. And we have been relatively lucky because those goods are considered by governments as necessity goods for the consumers. So the governments in different countries have enabled us to continue to produce almost normally and have actually given us a lot of help and support. In China, in our probiotic manufacturing facility in Guangzhou, we've been able to resume production quite early on the 2nd of February.
H&H has been using its China practices in its companies in other countries. That includes strict hygiene rules and work distancing for employees. The CEO says that particularly includes digital engagement with consumers, an area in which she says China leads the world.
We've also seen, of course, a massive shift of digitalization of consumer education. We've actually seen our Chinese team sharing those good practices with our foreign colleagues now in France, in Australia, in America, telling them how China is digitalizing, how do you get to the consumer through this digital way. And it's proving really successful as now in Western countries, parents are staying at home and they're also, of course, willing to get more information about products, more education, and get access to products in a better way.
H&H's strong position during the pandemic lies in huge demand for its baby formula products and a surging demand for immunity-related supplements such as probiotics and vitamin C. Looking forward, Letitia says it's important for a multinational company to build strategic resilience so that it can survive a global pandemic and come back stronger than before.
This global pandemic that nobody would have foreseen just a few months ago just reminds us how much of a VUCA environment we live in. So volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And I think it actually is a very good stretch test for an organization to show its ability to change and to adapt and to embrace change positively and to look beyond the challenges, to look for new opportunities. So for us in 2020, of course, this crisis is asking us to reshape the way we go to consumer, the way we manage and plan our supply chain, the way we digitalize our communication and our education, the way we look at our business model and where we should be available for consumers.
The pandemic is reminding people around the world how important their immunity system and health management are. Similarly, it's also reminding global companies of the importance of their risk management and their ability to adapt and change. These are big companies and they're pivotal to the world economy, but their size and previous success stories should not get in the way of them learning new and good practices so they could stand even stronger after the crisis. Zheng Junfeng, CGTN, Beijing.
And heading to the US now, with the pandemic forcing the closure of all non-essential businesses in several states, many small companies have been feeling the strain. And here's our correspondent Jagruti Dave reporting from Washington.
Upturned bar stools are on top of the tables where there should be customers. 2 weeks ago, Cohen's on the Wharf, an Irish bar in Washington, D.C., was all set with extra supplies ahead of St. Patrick's Day. But now, hardly anyone is coming in. Like many entrepreneurs, Mark Cohen closed his bar after the coronavirus pandemic spread in the US. He started offering a takeout service. His revenues have taken a serious hit.
We had one takeout order for delivery and about four pickup orders. So, you know, that's not even going to cover the gas, the electricity, just to have the place open.
Cohen had a total of 156 employees across his two businesses. Now he says he can only keep 11 salaried staff.
Being here for 9/11, I know what that was like. This is worse from a business perspective. So, because we don't know when we can open again.
According to the US Small Business Administration, small businesses make up a staggering 99.9% of all US firms.
Entrepreneurs across the US say they're afraid they won't be able to get back on their feet. And economists say the financial havoc of the coronavirus could spark the worst downturn in US history.
Companies of all sizes are grappling with an immediate cash crunch. But for small business owners, these challenges can be overwhelming.
Owners had to figure, where can I get a loan? How do I figure out what the new regulations are from the city or the state? How do I deal with my employees? What do I tell them? How do I, find time for myself? How do I think about the strategic direction of my business? Do I need to go to this meeting? I need to be on this call. And they simply can't do it all.
US President Donald Trump is suggesting the economy could reopen by Easter. Health officials say it's too soon to lift restrictions. No matter what the timeline, businesses across America will most certainly feel the impact of closures for some time to come. Jagruti Dave, CGTN, Washington.
Now, governments in Africa are teaming up with technology giants, including Facebook and Twitter, to fight misinformation about COVID-19 on social media platforms. Public health authorities worry that posts purporting to highlight cures and products to protect people against the virus will drive up infection rates on a continent beset by crumbling health facilities.
The online space has been littered with various versions of suspicious information on government's efforts to manage the spread of COVID-19 among the global population. In Nigeria's commercial city of Lagos, some residents responded to a misleading message claiming the government was due to spray coronavirus chemicals from a jet, and they called on people to stay indoors, take off their clothes and belongings outside.
Reading this kind of message, it was really disturbing, and a lot of people believed it. A lot of people believed it, and it was a big problem for me. I had to start telling people around me that, look, don't believe this message. It is not real. It's not possible for the government to spray from the top. If they really want to do it, they are going to come into the community and spray within the community.
If people are passing any false information concerning the virus, then I think we need to educate people, the society, more on that and how to take precautions.
In Nigeria, where most of the country's 200 million inhabitants live on less than $1 a day, what is considered a cheap way to beat the virus may be appealing. But for those for whom clean water, hand sanitizer and soap are out of reach, they are exposed to possible false options.
Definitely in times of crisis, you'll find one or two people up to some tricks, So spreading rumors about what can cure the virus, what cannot cure the virus, what is going to happen at night, they're going to spray insecticide at night and whatnot. Definitely these things happen in times of crisis.
Tech giant Facebook now has some of its members monitoring content globally. And third-party fact-checkers also monitoring posts in Nigeria's main languages, including Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo.
This is a global crisis at the moment, and we are taking particular steps to support global efforts. But it is an issue that we see across the world and across all issues. It is unfortunate that some people use our platform for negative activities. But we are working very hard. We have always made a commitment not to accept that sort of content on our platform, and we're working very hard to make sure that it stays off our platform.
In partnership with Nigeria's Center for Disease Control, Facebook is working to ensure accurate information approved by the global health organizations is sent to WhatsApp users in notifications, and the NCDC posts information at the top of Facebook feeds. Meanwhile, some African governments are also resorting to punitive measures. In Kenya, at least 2 men, including a popular blogger, have been arrested for publishing false information about the virus. South Africa introduced a law in March that makes sharing malicious falsehoods about the virus punishable by up to 6 months in jail. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And shifting focus now, let's take a look at how commodity markets performed today. Benchmark Brent crude oil futures reversed their losses today to rise above $30 a barrel. That, of course, is on hopes that a huge global supply cut deal to support prices is still alive. Meanwhile, gold prices, little change today as investors wait for U.S. jobs data, of course, for further cues on the economic effect of the coronavirus. Also, a stronger dollar did cap gold's gains. It is considered a safe store of value or a safe haven Though it is considered that, it has gained more than 6% so far this year, but it has seen sharp sell-offs recently as, of course, a global rout in equities prompted investors to sell the metal in exchange for cash and, of course, to meet margin calls in trading. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. Tanzanian businesses take a blow and regional neighbors battle the coronavirus. Now, despite Tanzania having relatively few coronavirus cases compared to its neighbors Rwanda, Kenya and Uganda, the country's businesses are already feeling the impact. Global supply chains are disrupted, directly affecting small and medium-sized enterprises and traders in the country. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo reporting from Dar es Salaam.
Victor Sponiventure owns a clothing store in Mwenge, one of Dar es Salaam's biggest shopping avenues. As thousands of citizens stay home and avoid unnecessary shopping trips, he says he's already making losses.
The rent we pay is high and my landlord isn't very understanding. To me, it's a real challenge. Most of my goals are no longer possible now. My children were meant to go to school, but now they can't. When schools open, I need to pay fees. I have many problems, honestly.
The government has put coronavirus mitigation measures in place, such as limiting movement, closing schools, and cancelling gatherings.
The government is encouraging people not to walk around or to limit their whereabouts. So likely you've seen that most of these people are also suffering. There's no people around, there's no people to sell, people to buy.
According to the Ministry of Industry and Trade, China has been Tanzania's largest trade partner for 3 consecutive years. Trade volumes between Tanzania and China last year alone stood at $3.976 billion. But the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a big drop in passenger and cargo volumes to and from China. Small businesses like these provide daily profits that the owners use to feed their families. Most of the products they sell here come from China and Kenya. Now, with global logistical challenges affecting imports, the coming months will be a fight for survival. Businesses are being forced to adapt. Online retail and deliveries are among the ways they can do that. Experts say the government can assist businesses by loosening some financial regulations.
Reduction of the costs, transferring money, at least some of the bank charges, reduction of the bank charges. Likely those with loans, maybe giving a grace period for the repayment of the loans and something like that. That would enable people to transact more or to do business more, even if they are not directly working from their offices.
With a decrease in imports from China, there are possibilities of further disruptions in the supply of household products, raw materials and other retail goods in Tanzania. This could feed through in higher prices for consumers at a time when many of their livelihoods are being hit. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, in Abuja, Nigeria, a certified chemist is making her contribution to prevent the novel coronavirus pandemic that has infected over 1 million people and, of course, killed more than 50,000. Her own solution to the problem is proactive. She's making hand sanitizers and spray from her small factory in Abuja. CGTN's Deji Badmus has her story.
Mixing natural ingredients and oils. Dr. Stephanie Sodangi produces a batch of what is arguably the most sought-after product globally at this time, hand sanitizers. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, hand sanitizers have been quickly disappearing off the shelves of supermarkets and pharmaceutical stores across Nigeria. But the chemist and doctor of acupuncture is stepping up to fill the gap with her own locally produced hand sanitizers.
Nigeria depends on importation. I myself, as a chemist, I didn't even put my interest in it. I was also buying the imported material until this need arose, and we found out that the borders are closed. We can no more import anything. So people like us had to swing into action to help ourselves.
So Sodangi decided to apply her knowledge of chemicals into making sanitary products. So she converted her small clinic to a factory. And today, she can hardly keep up with the demand for her hand sanitizers.
I actually started on a small scale so that my customers, my immediate customers, can have it available. But I see some pharmacies coming to me, some superstore also calling me that they are in need. And the demand is high, really high.
Her story epitomizes the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. She's deep into the practice of alternative medicine, but when hand sanitizers became a scarce commodity in Nigeria, she brought her experience in chemistry to help solve the problem.
I use pure aloe vera gel, as you can see, and ethanol. Then I add some essential oil like lavender. I also use my vitamin E oil and glycerin. You know, aloe vera on its own has antiseptic property. It has a defense mechanism towards fungi, bacteria, and also virus. And so it forms a good bonding material for ethanol and other essential products.
Her products are in such high demand that people are placing orders all over the country, and she distributes them via a courier service. Her advice is for people to keep up with the enthusiasm for proper hygiene and sanitation, even after the coronavirus pandemic is long gone.
Nigerians need to practice the use of hand sanitizer or soap to wash their hands as often as possible. Washing of hands and the use of sanitizers should not come to stop when COVID leaves. It has to be imbibed in us. We have to continue the practice because, like they say, health is wealth.
COVID-19 may have crippled many sectors globally, but it's also presented opportunities for entrepreneurs like Stephanie, and they're cashing in, albeit to defeat the disease. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, South Africa's Department of Agriculture has set aside a package of $67 million to help address the effects of the COVID-19 and ensure sustainable food production after the pandemic. Agriculture Minister Toko Didiza says while several businesses will be affected, the agriculture and food supply sectors will remain operational during the lockdown. Here's CGTN's Yoli Sanjamela with more.
My fellow South Africans,
in a bid to stop the spread of the virus, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a 21-day lockdown, but some industries have to continue to function, like the agriculture sector. Exports and imports of critical agriculture commodities and the logistical measures will continue during the lockdown period to ensure global and national food security. This will apply to the entire food value chain, from farm-related operations, agro-processing, and food manufacturing, and all support functions that ensure efficient delivery of the agro-food system.
We do appreciate that there will be stresses to the different producers as well as industry generally in the production sector when it comes to the food industry. We have therefore ensured that export and import will continue, and we have advised our relevant colleagues, even in the border post, to ensure that the movement of goods should not actually be negatively impacted by this lockdown.
Live auctions of livestock and sale of other agricultural commodities will also continue, but under strict conditions. Government has put aside some money to help the farmers at this critical time.
We will put aside 100 million rands to the land bank to ensure that it cushions the farmers, particularly those who have got loans and are in distress. We have also put aside 1.2 billion to assist smallholder farmers to ensure that they continue with the production.
Food price monitoring will be conducted on critical food basket commodities, and reports will be given to the nation on a regular basis.
Minister Didiza says agricultural production in all its forms will remain uncompromised. She says food security is particularly important at a critical time like this. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. Kenya's shilling was stable against the dollar, but traders are saying it will face more weakening pressure from the dollar in the days ahead, especially due to the falling tourism sector. According to traders, it could drop to 106 in the third quarter and pare some of those losses to 105.8 shillings per dollar in the final 3 months of 2020. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand reaching a historic low today, hitting 18.77 rand per dollar. That's during intraday trading. It was on track for its 7th week of losses. That's as investors flee riskier assets. The local currency was down 6.5% for the week, making this its longest losing streak since 2008. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.